I don't think I know any of you guys here, apart from those that I met last night at dinner, that were at the workshops. My name's Martin Hinshelwood. I'm a few things. I do various things. I'm one of those weird people that sits in both the process and the tools space. So I have to have arguments with myself all the time over whether it's a tool question or a process question. That's the way I look at it. But it's actually weird. I have a lot of customers that call me and they want me to deal with their tools problems, but they don't let me touch the Scrum process. And I have other customers that call me for the Scrum thing and don't let me touch the tools thing. There's some weird thing going on there. You can tweet me at Mr. Hinch. And I just wanted to say where I come from, where my background is. Like I said, I'm a lot of things. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. So I work with Ken Schwaber out of Boston. I'm a Visual Studio ALM MVP. Anybody here know what the MVP program is? Yes, a few people, cool. I don't think there are Visual Studio ALM MVPs anymore. I think we're developer tools MVPs with DevOps or something. I don't know, but that's what I call it. And I also work with the Visual Studio ALM Rangers as well. MVP you get for being loud and obnoxious. Yeah. Being in the Rangers, you actually have to contribute working software in order to get in there, so it's kind of a balancing act. Anybody here planning on coming to NDC Oslo? Awesome. So if you're coming to NDC Oslo, after NDC Oslo, we will be doing Tough Mudder in Scotland. So you're welcome to join us. Jacob's going to be there, along with some of the other speakers. So we're going to do Tough Mudder on the Sunday. For anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's an 18-kilometer obstacle course designed by the British Special Forces. So it's kind of fun. It sounds much worse than it actually is, but you get to tell people that that's what you've done. So it's kind of fun. So if anybody's interested, you can use the link there. I work with many customers on both tools and practices. Although I'm based in Scotland, I kind of work all over the place. I think last year I had 38 customers in 14 different countries. So I travel all over the place, all over the world, which is kind of fun, but I don't get to see my house very often. I spend about 300 days a year on the road, which is kind of fun. But it means that I get to see a lot of strange things that customers do, because customers call me when they've got problems. A lot of people ask me, what do most people do? And I have to say, I really don't know what most people do. I only know what the really messed up people do, because they're the ones that call me. So my picture of the world of software development is a very jaded one of poor practices, bad software delivery, and terrible, terrible software. But that's just because I'm a consultant. But an interesting thing that I found, anybody heard of the Kaos Report? Yes? Have you read it? Or just heard of it? Because I think it costs like $5,000 to buy. It's ridiculously expensive. But they do a bunch of stats. They collect data from thousands of projects, software projects around the world. I think it's about 60% US, 40% rest of the world. And they collect it, and there's a bunch of key pieces of information that kind of came out of the 2015 version that I like to mention at the start. The first is that I used to get a lot of people saying to me that Scrum only works for small projects. It doesn't work for big stuff. Have you heard that one before? Well, the first time last year, I got somebody say to me, "Oh, Scrum only works for big projects. You shouldn't use it for small ones." And I was kind of like, what? That's kind of a bit weird, but it's flipped on its head. But if you look at the actual stats for projects, true enough, small projects are 32% more likely to succeed than traditional project management if you use Scrum and Agile. 32% is quite a bit. But if you look at large projects, 600% more likely to succeed. So scaling is where the biggest benefits are. Many teams working together are where the biggest bonuses are. There's a couple of weird things that I like to mention as well. One is that your customers are happier if you don't deliver what they asked for. That's an interesting one. But if we deliver what they need now, that's what they'll love you for. And that's part of that empirical process. That's why we need a new way of doing things. So that's I think, is a really powerful quote. And the other one, if you look at people that are doing, they use the word waterfall a lot. They really mean traditional software development or not agile. Yeah, because many organizations do. I think the most common process in the world is no defined process. We just make some stuff up and do that. So I think that's included in waterfall, because generally it looks kind of stage gatey when you just make up your process. And one of the key factors to success is having highly skilled teams. If your teams are not highly skilled professional teams, you're not going to be able to deliver working software or as much working software as you would like. So I'm not saying that poorly skilled teams don't deliver anything. They do, because hundreds of thousands of companies out there are building software. Many of them are building bad software, but it's still software that somebody gets value out because people are paying for it. Yeah? But it could be so much better. It could provide so much more value to us, the customers, than it does if they had highly skilled teams. And it's actually very rare in my experience, but again, I go with a lot of the customers that have problems. So there are 4 things I kind of want to cover. The first one is the cost of scaling. I'm actually going to convince you not to scale, because it is a bad idea. It's just a bad idea. Don't do it unless you have to. And then talk about how we get there. What do we need to get there? Why can we not use the commonly expressed scaling frameworks that are out there? Why are they bad? Why are they not going to work for us? That would be my first assertion. And then I want to talk about how we can use Scrum to scale Scrum. Do we need anything else? If we do need other things, what are those things that we need in order to make it better? And then I want to go through, if we've got time, I usually try and get through as many as I can, but I have a big list of practices that are super useful in that world, and some of them are practices that you'll be doing already, okay? These practices are applicable regardless of the process you're following. But if you're trying to build software at scale, some of them become less optional. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So the cost. Obviously, if I have 2 teams, I can deliver twice as much work. Yeah? 4 teams, 4 times as much work. Yeah, well, that's what our project managers believe. Yeah, because people are just widgets, we can just add them up, but it's not really true. You don't get that bit at the top. And really what happens is as more people get together, I think this idea applies regardless of whether you're talking about a team or a group of teams working together. Anybody know what the sweet spot is for, or what's the recommended size for Scrum teams? 2 pizzas, that's a good one. I like that one. In the Scrum guide, it would say 6 plus or minus 3. So if you get less than 3 people, why don't you just sit next to each other and build some software? Yeah, you don't need Scrum, you don't need any kind of process. If you've got more than 9 people, it's probably you can't feed them with 2 pizzas, and it's going to get a little bit complicated to know what's going on. That's why you have that sweet spot. And that sweet spot kind of applies in exactly the same way to teams working together. If you have 2 teams working together, maybe you don't need to worry too much. You just get 2 groups, just have them talk, maybe sit in the same building, in the same room, and talk to each other. You've got 3 teams, starts to get a little bit more complicated. 6 teams, you maybe need something. 10 teams, you're going to have even more problems, because then you're hitting that greater complexity issue. Okay, so you want to be able to simplify that as well. I don't remember if I have a slide on that, but anybody here got more than 9 teams working together? Okay, so you don't need to worry about it anyway. I have a customer in Norway that I work with that has, I think it's just over 80 teams in 12 locations in 9 different countries building one product. So that's kind of fun. That's kind of difficult. That's kind of like office-sized groups of people. But what really happens, and you'll know this if you've worked on any large-scale project, is when you get a little bit too many teams working together, productivity starts to drop off. You start delivering less value to the customers because things are just too complicated. There's everybody stepping on each other's toes, getting in the way. So, my advice to you is if you don't have to have more than one team, don't have more than one team. Have one team working on your product if you can. Scaling is not the solution you're looking for. Anybody read Jeff Sutherland's new book? Scrum, twice the features in half the time. Jeff Sutherland he's effectively a venture capitalist, one of the founders of Scrum. His company buys organizations that are failing at delivering software, implements Scrum, and then sells them for much more than they paid for them. That's what they do for a living. So it works for him. Twice the features in half the time. That's 400% improvement. So why don't you just take that one team that you've got and make them 400% more effective than trying to add 4 more teams and all the complexity that comes with that? Yeah? So we had this thing called Scrum. And unfortunately, most teams, especially almost all teams that I see, most teams that I hear about, aren't doing what I would call professional Scrum. They're doing what Ken likes to call it amateur Scrum. I don't like the word amateur because there's a lot of implication there, but it's kind of true. I kind of like a mechanical Scrum. I think a few people have been using the word flaccid Scrum. That works too. There's even more connotation with that. Because what are they doing? They're just following the rules. That's it. We're going to have a daily stand-up, which isn't really the rule. The rule's daily Scrum. We're going to have a daily stand-up. And yeah, that's it. That's what we're going to do. And then we're doing Scrum, aren't we? Yeah? Or even if we're following all the rules, are we actually getting the value from it that we're expecting to get from it? So if you're not getting at least twice as much value delivery as you did before you implemented Scrum, you're probably not. Yeah? Very few teams get the 400%, but you can get pretty close to it. So what we kind of ended up with when teams tried to implement Scrum was something more like this, because they focused on following the rules. The rules are the magic, the magic fire-breathing cat riding the unicorn that's going to solve all our problems. Okay? It's not. We need 3 things to have an effective professional team. We still need the rules. Yeah? I like to think about it, if you guys went out and you bought the board game Monopoly, do you have that here? Pretty sure it's everywhere. Buy Monopoly, would you expect it to come with a rule book or a strategy guide? It would come with a rule book. Is the rule book going to help you win at Monopoly? No. You need to understand the rules to be able to play effectively within the scope that you're playing in. You need some kind of technical excellence, domain knowledge, understanding of not only your product domain, but also your technical domain. And then maybe we need something to help guide us so that we don't make the wrong decisions. And that's our values and principles, our moral compass, making sure that we're not delivering software which doesn't totally work. We kind of didn't have time to finish all the testing last sprint, but we're going to ship it anyway. Is that respectful to your customers? Do your customers expect working software or buggy, nasty software that doesn't always work? And what have you trained them to expect? That's an interesting one. For those that haven't been following the changes to the Scrum Guide, last year, Scrum.org and Jeff Sutherland realized that the values weren't as prominent in the Scrum Guide as they should be. So they added them right up front in the Scrum Guide. And these are the values that you need to add to your Scrum process in order to help guide decision-making to making the right decisions. So we need courage. We need courage to show exactly what's going on, even when it doesn't look good. Sometimes we're building software and things go wrong. Things look bad. Yeah, that's not the end of the world. We need to go fix it. No blame. Fix it. We need focus to actually get work done. So our product owner needs to leave us alone during the sprint to go build stuff. Our customer needs to allow us to have focus. We need that sprint goal to have focus. Our development team needs commitment to delivering working software. Notice I did not say commitment to delivering everything in the sprint. I said commitment to delivering working software. I don't care how much, as long as it works at the end, because that's the thing that matters. We need to respect our customers by delivering high-quality software that they expect. And we need the openness to be able to say, it's not quite what you expect, or this is what we've delivered, all of those things. We need all of those things together. So for me, if you guys don't have what I'm defining as a professional team, all three of those elements, we're doing it the right way for the right reasons, with the engineering excellence and following the rules, you're not a professional Scrum team and you're never going to be able to scale. You need a professional Scrum team first. Because if you take two amateur Scrum teams and stick them together, what's the result going to be? An even bigger car crash. Okay. So if we can agree that that's the foundation for scaling, we now need to talk about how do we go about scaling? Why do we need to scale? And how do we get there? How do we get to this scale? So I'm going to culture. The thing that is going to block all of your ability to change and continually does, which I'm sure you've run into, is culture. I mean, you got a good definition of culture? Because I have one here. How we do things here is your culture. So when you want to do continuous delivery in your organization and we want to deliver working software every day, we want a new version of our software shipped to production every day, and the company goes, well, that's not the way we do things here. Our customers will never accept that. It's actually not true. You can change those cultures, but those are the things you run into. And there's a lot of things which impact that. And I'm going to use an example here to give you an idea. There's a lot of scaling frameworks out there. There's a very expensive, complicated, diagrammed, famous one that is one of the most common ones done at scale because it's easily purchased. And I want to explain why just taking the way somebody else implemented something. Have you heard of the Spotify model? There's a Spotify white paper, and loads of people take it and implement it. The Spotify guys laugh their ass off at people that do that because they know it's not going to work for you, because it works for them in their culture, and here's why. Well, I'm going to use the Schneider model just as an example. I don't necessarily want to debate the merits of the Schneider model, but let's say we have a people-orientated culture on the left-hand side of our x-axis and a company-orientated on the right-hand side. I'm sure you can think of your company and where it might fit on that, from very personal-based all the way over to corporate-based. And then if we take a vertical axis of innovation at the bottom, so we have a lot of competing ideas and we try stuff and we experiment, all the way up to actuality is all about, what's the problem now and let's fix that. Okay, what's the next problem now and let's fix that. So we're not necessarily innovating, we're solving the problems of today. Those axes make sense? Okay, so if we were to break that into quadrants, let's say the top right is we succeed by keeping and gaining control. I'm sure you have some companies that you've worked with that's their mantra. Yeah, if we control everything a little bit more, everything will just turn out well. With a more detailed plan, and if all the developers would just follow every task at the time, start time and end time that they were told to, everything would work out. Okay, so that's the control culture. Every company has a little bit of control. These are not absolutes. I'm drawing them as absolutes, but you sit somewhere in the model. And so that's control. Other companies, we succeed by being the best at who we are. That sounds fair. So we get craftsmanship, professionalism, achievement, efficiency. That's competence. Nobody has no competence ever. Well, I've worked with some companies that maybe fall right at the top of that bar, but most people have a percentage of these things. It's competence. Or we succeed by working together. We're going to take a group of people, we'll work together, and we'll deliver working software. So it's all about interaction and trust and partnership, and all of companies in every one of these quadrants build software. Yeah? So that's collaboration. And then we have the final one. We succeed by growing people who fulfill our vision. I can think of at least one company that sits in there, Netflix. That's what they focus on, the people. So creativity, it's all subjective. It's based on faith. There's not any the rules that you would find in normal organizations, and that's a kind of a cultivating culture. Yeah, we'll cultivate the people. They will grow, and they will deal with whatever problems that come up and figure out what's best to solve our company problems. So it can be very, if you're in control, cultivation is totally idealistic and unworkable. Yeah, but there are companies out there. Now, that is annoying. If it does it again, I will need to do something. Okay. So I want you to think about where your company is right now. Think about your organization, the organization you work in, or your customers if you're a consulting company, and where do they sit on this? Was I right? Of course I wasn't. I might have been close, but it's not going to be exact because there's too many variables. What about where's your company going? What's their plan for change? Every company has some sort of plan. It might be stay where we are. That might be their plan. But is your company going to that B location? Probably not. It's probably going somewhere else on that graph. Maybe it's closer to control. Maybe it's closer to competence. Maybe it's closer to cultivation, wherever your company wants to go. Can we get there via a straight line? We're just going to make a change and it happens? And just go there? No, it doesn't work. Because every single organization that you guys work for has a different culture. They have a different culture, a different place right now, and they're going somewhere different. It's unique to every company, and their journey is unique, and you probably have something more wavy and wiggles all over the place till you get to where you want to be. But the idea that you can have a blueprint for how an organization should operate and just apply it to your organization is completely unreasonable. And it may work in some places, it may partially work in other places, but in most places it's not going to work. You can squish people as much as you like into the same round hole, but if they're square, it's not going to fit. You can shave the edges off, but people will be unhappy, they'll leave. So, I don't want to have some methodology that I'm going to go implement in an organization. I want companies, just like a Scrum team doesn't have a methodology, they have a framework, and they build their own methodology for building software in their company with their culture around that. We want the same thing at scale. We want to limit the rules, have the minimum set of rules, the minimum set of mandatory happenings as possible, and allow everything else to go with practices. And I also try and avoid the word best practices, because there's no such thing as best practices, only adequate practices for the current culture. That changes, practices change. So I want to use Scrum to scale Scrum, because that sounds reasonable, but we need something to call it, because we want to refer to it just like we refer to Scrum. When you refer to Scrum, you're talking about one team. Scrum applies and focuses on one team. Look at the Scrum guide, and nowhere does it mention two teams working together. Yeah, it's about one team. So what is a group of things working together? It's kind of a nexus. Yeah, so Scrum.org have their Nexus framework, which is an implementation of Scrum at scale to try and help people, again, the rule book rather than the strategy guide, in figuring out what that looks like. So I've got the Scrum diagram there. It's fairly straightforward. Everybody's familiar with Scrum. Obviously, you're here, so you're probably already familiar with it anyway. This is the Nexus diagram. I've highlighted the differences. There's not that many. We have a couple of extra little mini events happening because we need to enshrine additional communication paths, because things are more complicated when you're building software with groups of people. Yeah, we need to make sure that certain communications have to happen. Okay? We've also got an extra kind of group of people there called the integration team. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we're still making working software. We're still following the same fundamental rules. At the end of the sprint, we have fully integrated working software, one piece of working software. Not we've got 9 teams, so we've got 9 features in 9 different branches. You are not building working software then. You're building 9 different pieces of working software. You've still got to do work to merge them together. So at the end of that sprint, you have one piece of working software that your product owner can choose to ship to production. Does that make sense? Same as Scrum. So no additional difference there. So what are these things? Well, we've got our diagram. We're going to have a bigger backlog. It's just going to be bigger. Refinement, while you could maybe in one Scrum team in a simple domain get away with not doing a lot of refinement, what used to be called grooming the backlog, refining the backlog, you now have no option but to refine the backlog because you've got multiple teams working together. You need enough understanding of the dependencies between items in your backlog to be able to work that across multiple teams. That's pretty difficult. So we're going to take that understanding of the backlog, so we need a lot more understanding of the backlog, and we've got this new thing called a Nexus sprint planning, which really includes 2 things. We've got some kind of group of people. I like to call this the team of teams approach. You heard of that expression, team of teams? Team of teams is whatever needs to happen. You have an event, people have to turn up at it. The people who turn up are the right people. Yeah, if somebody doesn't turn up, they don't care. If they don't care, they're probably not valuable to be there anyway. Yeah? So we want representatives from all of the teams to turn up at this meeting because we're going to discuss dependencies. The dependencies that are going to impact how we're going to deliver things during this sprint. Because we've got 9 teams and we might have one feature that needs 3 teams worth of work combined together in the same sprint. We've got to figure that out. That's hard. But it's reality. So we're going to have a little group of people get together and then pass that information back to the teams while they do their normal sprint planning. But they have extra input to their sprint planning. Make sense? The reason that's kind of, I don't know if it's kind of like rather than it being one box, it's a kind of stack of boxes, is because I might have multiple teams across multiple time zones. If I've got a team in the US, a team in India, a team in Australia, I'm not going to be able to do all of those meetings at the same time. So this Nexus sprint planning is probably over a 48-hour period. Yeah? That's just reality. Reality of time zones, big teams. Okay? And then we need something to show all of the work that's underway. That's what the Nexus sprint backlog is. We need to see everything from all the teams that's underway, but we want to be able to compartmentalize it and see just one team's work. At this point, you're thinking, how do you do that without a tool? You probably can't. Okay? At this point, and at this scale, you're probably going to need some kind of tools. I'm a TFS guy. I'm going to recommend TFS or VSTS. I think it's a tool that's built by a scaling team to do scaling. The VSTS team is about 70 teams working together to build one product, so they're using their own product to build it. Jira does work. There are other tools out there. You can knit together your own solution. There's all kind of things to do that. But we need those 2 views. We need to be able to see one team's work so that a team can see their own work, and we need to see everybody's work together. Cool. We're going to have a more complicated daily exercise. Everybody's going to have their daily Scrum in different time zones. So we need a team of teams to get together. This is not the same as Scrum of Scrums. Scrum of Scrums was the Scrum Masters get together. This is representatives of the team get together. So it may, yes, sure, the Scrum Master may be the one that goes, but I would prefer if it was members of the engineering team because they're discussing dependencies. So they're going to get together, discuss dependencies for the next 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on your time zones, and then they're going to take that information back to their team. Cool. So we've got that communication on a daily basis. We've got it on our sprint basis and on our daily basis. We've only building one product. So we only have one review because we're reviewing one product. Now that means you're going to have to use additional practices to figure out how to go achieve that because getting 600 people in 12 locations in 9 different countries together for one meeting is going to be pretty difficult. Go figure it out. That's an engineering problem. That's a process problem. There's loads of good ways to do that. Some teams, if you're reasonably co-located, do a science fair style approach. You familiar with the science fair? You get everybody in a room. Every team gets a booth. Your stakeholders go to the booth that they care about giving feedback for and provide the feedback. That's one way. The VSTS team at Microsoft that build Visual Studio Team Services, they, at the end of their sprint, one of their sprint outputs is a video of the features that they did that gets sent out to all the stakeholders, and then their review is just about providing feedback. They don't do any demos or anything. You go watch the video before you get there. How do you scale these things? Well, you've got to come up with some kind of solutions. There's lots of strategies for that. What about an integration team? We need a new accountability. We've got 3 accountabilities in Scrum. The development team is accountable for delivering working software. The product owner is accountable for maximizing value. And the Scrum Master is accountable for the process. How do we integrate stuff together? Got lots of teams working together, so we kind of need a new group that is a kind of integration team, and their accountability is making sure that at the end of the sprint, everything's stuck together. Now, generally, this is a team of teams, i.e. representatives from each of the teams. I work with organizations that call this their DevOps team or their build team. I would prefer it not to be a permanent team. I want representatives of the development teams, because then they bring that knowledge back to the development teams, and the development teams own it themselves. You've not got the overhead. Yeah? But they might have to get together on a regular cadence to help figure out dependencies, help other teams with their build process, all of those kind of things. It's kind of like a coaching role. Coaching the teams, helping them understand. Kind of putting me out of a job, but there you go. And then when we do our retrospective, we've kind of got 2 team of teams that has to happen. We have to take the problems at the integration level, i.e. all the teams working together. We have to come up with a list of problems that we want the teams to discuss, give that as input to the teams take that, plus their own problems, do a normal retrospective with that information, and then they might have awesome ideas outputted. So they put that together, that group gets back together, decides what the Nexus wants to do as a whole, so you might have Nexus commitments at the end of the retrospective, as well as individual team commitments. That goes back to the teams, and they figure out how to go achieve them the next sprint. There's your inspect and adapt loop, because it's a slightly bigger problem. So we're still doing Scrum. There's very few additional things in there. In fact, all we've added is 1 role to give additional accountability for integration, because we need somebody to actually look after that, because if we don't say, you guys are looking after that, nobody will. If you've worked on large-scale projects, you'll know that's what happens. We've got a more complicated planning because we've got time zones. We've got a more complicated daily Scrum because we've got time zones and various teams working together in different places. Even if you're in the same building, it's the same problem. Yeah, it's just over a shorter period of time. And we've got 1 review, again, to give that idea that we're not having separate reviews, so we have to kind of name it. And we have a retrospective. So we've actually not got a lot of additional stuff there. There's not anything new. And we've still got a sprint backlog. It's just bigger. So, yes?
So if you only have one, do you only have one backlog and one product owner, or each team?
That was a good question. So the question is, would you only have 1 backlog and 1 product owner? Yes, because you're still doing Scrum. The product owner is always bottoming. Okay, so in the Scrum guide, the Scrum allocates, I'm maybe using the wrong terminology, but Scrum allocates 10% of the development team's time to help the product owner with backlog refinement. Okay? So if you've got a team of 6 people, plus a product owner, you've got the product owner full-time, potentially. I know there's bottlenecks and they have other duties as well, but let's say a half-time role managing the backlog, maybe full-time. And then you've got, in a 2-week sprint, a whole day per person for your team members. So that's 6 man-days to help the product owner. Okay, well, if you have 9 teams of 6 working together, Yeah, so that's how you scale that. Now, you're going to have, at some point, maybe the product owner has additional help somewhere. That's kind of okay. When you get to really big scale, you might break it down differently. For example, the VSTS team effectively run multiple nexuses. They have some groups that it's one team working on part of the product, and other places where there's 2 or 3 teams working together. When it's 2 or 3 teams working together, there's one product owner. When there's one team, there's one product owner. So it's not one product owner for the entire product, it's for each part of the product. Because this is a complicated product. Think of Office. It's not the same product owner for Word as for Excel. Yeah, but they ship one product in the box. So there's ways to break down. Again, you're getting into practices. Yeah, so you might, product area owners might be the case that you have break your product into areas. But it depends on the complexity of your scale. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I answered it both ways. I said have one product owner, and then I said you can have multiple product owners.
Yeah.
Practices.
The problems we see is that the product owners in the different areas don't have the same priorities.
The product owners in different areas not having the same priorities. Yes, and that's a really difficult problem to solve. It's so difficult. In my Scrum Master class, I have a whole set of exercises around thinking about those ideas, because there's no hard and fast rules. It depends on the situation. Some organizations, they have one product owner, but lots of product area owners, but the product owner makes the final call. You need one person. Or I worked with a company in the US that makes coffee, and they had the problem of, I think it was 9 different area owners, and they didn't have an Uber. So we just lock them in a room with a computer, and it's the only computer that can order the backlog. You guys figure it out. You're business people. Solve that problem. Yeah? Does that make sense for everybody? Is there any other questions on Nexus and the additional? Yes? That's a really good question. So none of these meetings are any longer. I'll caveat that. So your sprint planning is your normal sprint planning. If you're doing in Scrum, sprint planning is defined as 8 hours or proportionally less for smaller sprints. So generally, a team that is doing 2-week sprints will do no more than a 4-hour sprint planning meeting. Fair? Right. This bit at the start is 15 minutes. If it's taking longer than 15 minutes, your stuff's too complicated. You don't understand the backlog enough, refinement wasn't done. Yeah? If you understand what's coming up next, that should be an easy, right, we're just going to have a discussion around the dependencies, representative of each team, get together, figure it out, okay, take that information back to your teams. That should be pretty straightforward. Because remember, the teams select the work from the backlog, so you have to have that agreement up front about what are we going to organize together to go do. Did that answer?
It involves some level of decentralization, right? The
Yep.
process is done to centralize, like the chief decision maker behind Nexus. So
Yep.
we have too much control there.
We'd have too much control, and there would be too many points in the chain, and the message would get lost. Yeah. Same as what we have the difference between traditional organizational hierarchical structure versus the node-based structure that Agile fosters. You push responsibility down the organization. The teams have responsibility and accountability for delivering working software, of deciding what software they're going to go build off the backlog. The product owner sets strategic direction and goals in the backlog. But just because something's at the top 2 things in the backlog might not be the things the team selects based on the sprint goal that is agreed with the product owner at the beginning of the sprint. Yeah? To get focus. Sprint goal gives you focus. So, yeah, and you're probably going to have a Nexus goal as well. What's the overriding goal? And then each team has their own goal that goes to fulfilling that larger goal. Did that? Cool. So it shouldn't be longer than 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. Why would it be longer than that? Same for the daily scrum. Yeah, even if they're getting together and it's taking longer than 15 minutes, you've probably got too many teams. Same as your normal daily scrum. There's either too much work going on or your teams are too big. If you've got more than 9 teams in your Nexus, you're going to have that problem. Same as if you've got more than 9 people on your Scrum team.
Okay, if I may, just as an additional question then.
Sure.
Hierarchical nexuses.
Yes, indeed you can. So I wasn't talking about it in here, but I teach a class for Scrum.org on scaling Scrum. I teach it at Programutvikling in Norway, and it's taught all over Europe. But there's an idea of Nexus Plus. So I'm going to have multiple Nexus working together to build one bigger piece of software. So for example, if you think of something like Office, you might have a Nexus for Excel. I don't think it's split up that way, but you might have a Nexus for Excel, Word, Exchange, SharePoint, and then they're all working together to have compatibility across and dependencies across all of their products. Yeah. It's taking into account the reality that the more people you put together, the more complicated it gets, and at some point it's too complicated. Same as a Scrum team. Put 20 people in a Scrum team and see how it gets on. Yeah, 20 teams together have the same problem. And I do see it time and again in organizations, trying to get too many teams working together on one product. And the product owner bottleneck is the most common one. In fact, just not having a product owner at all is the most common dysfunction that I see in organizations. I think very few organizations I've ever been into actually have somebody who's the product owner. That's their biggest problem. So they're not, even if their teams are awesome, they're still not delivering the right software. You need good product owner first. Deliver the right software, at least deliver the right software, even if it's badly built. At least it's right. So, some practices that will help you. I've taken a selection of practices from the course, the Scaling Professional Scrum course. The course talks about 50 different practices that are useful on top of the other conversations around Scrum and scaling and those kind of things. So my first one that I mentioned before, descale. If you've got 60 people working together to build one product and they suck at it, you probably don't want them working together building one product. You probably want to scale it back, go back to individual teams, encourage those teams to be awesome, make individual awesome teams, and then bring them back together to build one product once they are professional teams rather than amateur teams. And then you'll get more nicer integration. It's all about maximizing the value that you're delivering at the end of the day. That's what we're all here for. That's what our customers are paying us for, delivering value to them. Yeah, various ways to help with that. Something that Ken's been talking about a lot recently is something called Scrumble. It's the Scrum equivalent of pulling the chain in Kanban. In Toyota, in the production lines, if a person who's running their particular station on the production line finds any sort of problem, they've got a chain next to their production line, next to their station that they pull. It stops the entire production line, and all the managers come down to figure out how do we solve whatever the problem is that resulted in pulling the chain. And they may pull the chain 2 or 3 times a day. Okay, it's Kanban. They're working in a production line. A production line is effectively a much simpler process, even though I'm not belittling the complexity of creating it, but once it's running, it's the same thing all the time. Software is not like that. Software is different all the time, otherwise we wouldn't build it in the first place. So we may get to the point where we have a significant enough technical debt that it is almost impossible to add new features to the product. Yeah, if you monitor the number of features that you add to the product year on year, you'll find as you go on, it will get less. Because you're not cleaning up after yourselves. You don't necessarily have professional teams. You're not necessarily... any teams here got a definition of done? So that says it all. Not a single hand went up. If you don't have a definition of done, how do you know when you're done at the end of the sprint? How do you know you've met the minimum quality bar? And you're shipping your software. How do you know whether you've to-do tests for this story or not? Well, it's not in our done, so we'll just skip it for this story, this sprint. It's okay, it looks good. Ship it. Okay, now you've shipped and there's some sort of problem in it because you didn't test it. That's technical debt. That builds up over time. Every time you don't go back and refactor that shortcut you took when you didn't know enough, technical debt. That's stuff that's going to bite you in the ass later. You've got to go back and fix it. So at some point, you get to the stage where it's too difficult to add new features. You need to stop adding new features because you're just adding to the problem. Spend some amount of time paying back enough technical debt, refactoring, some re-architecting, maybe upgrading technologies, whatever it is that happens to be the problem and will get you there, and then restart that sprinting process. So we're completely stuffed, and we need to fix the problem. Having some kind of dependency map to help you with cross-team refinement. When you're refining work across multiple teams, there's multiple things going on. You might have something, this is a technique. You can come to my class to figure out how to do the technique, or you can Google it as well. But effectively, arrows pointing this way have a dependency, the correct dependency, i.e. the dependency is on this side of the thing you want to do. Whereas if you've got arrows pointing this way, you know that it's trying to be done before something that it's dependent upon, so you can't do that. And you've got to figure that out across teams. And things that are verticals are dependencies within the same sprint. And again, having some way of visualizing this, having some way of making sure you know that these things are happening will help your teams figure out the dependencies. Even if you've just got 2 teams, sometimes this makes sense. 3 teams, it makes a lot more sense. And this is color-coded by what the problem is. You might have people dependencies between teams. That's okay, just deal with it. That's the real world. Oh, we've only got one database analyst that understands that part of the schema. And 3 teams need that person. Well, you're going to have to figure it out. Cross-training, pairing, doing things in sequence, all of those type of things. Scaling teams. It's very difficult to just go get 80 people and magically have 8 awesome teams, or 10 awesome teams, or whatever number you end up having. It works a lot better if you start small, make one awesome team building that product. That awesome team will have a demonstrable velocity. If that velocity is too low, you either make the team better or add additional teams. And sometimes it makes sense to break those teams up into smaller teams and then add people. So that's the splitting and building up model. Or you might have something more like an internship model where people rotate through. You have one team that is, these guys are rock stars, and will rotate people as internships through that team and then into their own teams. That can work too. Can you imagine the company that I was mentioning before with 80 teams in a ridiculous number of countries? They had not a single team on the same cadence. So they were all delivering software on different cadences, yet they had to create RCs and betas. And how does that work? Well, you end up with a lot of buggy software being shipped to customers because people aren't finished. So if you're going to have multiple teams working together, get them on the same cadence. If you can't get them on the same cadence, at least get them on a, if you're do 4-week cadences, and then some teams can do 1 week and 2 week, but you can't do 3 week. Does that make sense? A little multiplier of the cadences, so at least at the point in time when we say this is our line in the sand for the whole Nexus, we've got a working version of software from everybody. That works. This is an obvious one. You've probably run into this a lot. Feature teams. I don't know. I've been bashing my head against this one for about 10 years. Feature teams is absolutely key. Yes, you can do component teams, but it's a nightmare for dependencies. Absolute nightmare. The way you minimize dependencies, feature teams. And yes, it's difficult. If it wasn't difficult, we wouldn't be building the software. That's just the way it is. Communities of practice, those old silos in our organization. So we used to have test. I have customers that still have that. Have test and QA, or commercialization, whatever you want to call it. And then you might have operations, and you might have, what else might you have? I don't know. Analysts, all these silos. Ditch the silos, create communities of practice. People that were the managers for those silos should become community leaders. Yes, they're not necessarily going to be the right person for that job. Totally get that, but give them the option. And then you have communities of practice across your teams. So you have cross-functional teams, not necessarily cross-functional individuals, but cross-functional teams that can tackle almost any feature that comes in. And yes, you may have some specialist areas, but that's just reality. You know, this team can take this feature, but this other team can't. That's okay. But make sure you have communities of practice so you don't lose some of those skills. You don't lose the tester skills. You don't lose the automation skills. You don't lose the analyst skills. Make sure they can all get together and have some kind of cross-pollination of ideas across the teams. Same as they used to do in the silos. Yeah? Anybody doing communities of practice right now? You guys, communities of practice are awesome. It's a very different style of organizing the knowledge, but it works really well and results in much better value to your customer because you're able to share that knowledge. And just because I'm a coder doesn't mean I can't go to the testing community of practice. I want to go find out a little bit more about testing so that I don't make my tester as unhappy as my code does. Yeah? Usual microservices. Breaking, how do you take that bigger product with one product owner and not have to deal with scaling? Make your product smaller. Break it into microservices that are independent products, can be released on an independent schedule, but may have dependencies with nice contracts between those pieces of software. That will solve some of your problem. It's not a silver bullet, but I've seen many teams solve almost all their problems by moving towards a more microservices style architecture. That works as well. Then you don't need to scale, because scaling is bad. Scaling is always bad. Okay. Have some way to relate things that you're doing up a kind of hierarchy of work items. I'm a TFS guy. We have epics in TFS that break down into features, which break down into backlog items, which then break down into the tasks. And you can monitor that hierarchy. Your product owner might only care about features. That can be okay. That's another way to scale. Your product owner goes up one level. The teams write their own stories. The teams deal with the execution as long as it rolls up to the feature. Product owner's happy. Again, granularity, depends. You are going to have some sort of tool. You're going to have fields, you're going to have data, you're going to have to know which team things on your backlog are. Can you imagine having your Nexus backlog on this wall and 5 sprint backlogs on this wall, and you got to keep them in sync? Yeah, that's going to kind of suck, isn't it? Okay, so digital tool, move stuff around. Again, I've got TFS up here because that's my comfort zone. Your comfort zone might be Jira or Trello or something else. As long as you can create the visualizations, that works. Oh, that's an old screenshot. Anyway, it even says Visual Studio Online in the corner, which is very old. Telemetry. Users lie. User feedback isn't always awesome, and users lie. Users will tell you they need the kitchen sink when, in fact, they're never going to use that kitchen sink. And the reason they tell you that is because we've trained them to give us that information, because we deliver on a yearly cadence. I'm not saying you do, but in general in the industry. So when a customer says is giving you requirements, they give you everything they think they might possibly need at the time you would deliver the software. They might not need half of that stuff. They just think they do right now, but they might not by the time you get there. So have some sort of telemetry in your software, monitor feature usage, button clicks. It's super easy in web applications. There's lots of options, but you can do it in applications as well. This is one of my in fact, it's just a screenshot of application insights that's showing the users, sessions. It's got pages, but I use it for my applications, and I have command line tools, which I gather the same sort of metrics for. So I can see how often my command line tool is executed, what commands people are executing, how often they execute those commands. So when I'm thinking about going and refining a feature, spending some time fixing bugs, should I go fix the bugs and refine the features in the tool that nobody uses? No, spend it not where I want, but where it's going to provide value to customers. Internal open source, this is a huge deal now within organizations. Anybody here work in an organization with more than 100 engineers? 1,000 engineers? 10,000 engineers? Okay. Well, 10,000, more than 10,000 engineers? Cool. Well, 10,000 people that call themselves engineers. Okay, I'm okay with that. So internal open source is about bringing, if you've got a lot of users in your organization, bringing some of that community and love in the open source world internally. So it might not be stuff that is available on the internet, like you're not going to go and publish your tool on GitHub, but I want Team 4 in India and Team 5 in Beijing to be able to contribute and add pull requests to my product because maybe they have time to find and fix that bug that they care about that I do not. Yeah, so internal open source is a big deal in many large organizations. And it's really powerful because, you know, do we really need to write another logging framework? That's the common example, but there are hundreds of different ways of doing that, which is why open source exists in the first place. So that's one of my favorite practices, and it's very big in organizations just now. So I talked, did I have a thing? I talked a little bit about not scaling, and then we kind of discussed, or I gave an example of why a methodology isn't going to cut it. Yeah, you're not going to be able to use a methodology that somebody else came up with, a recipe for your scale. You're going to have to suck it up and build your own scaling process. There's plenty of practices out there. Pick and choose the ones that make sense for you, but have some sort of fundamental rules to make sure that you don't go off target and you enshrine communication paths within your organization. That's what Nexus is trying to do, enshrine communication only, and some of the planning ideas. And then we covered Nexus. I don't know, anybody here was that your first introduction to Nexus? Yeah. So it's something that I've been working with for quite a while now. I have a number of customers which have started using it. It was actually reverse engineered. Ken didn't just go, oh, Nexus, right, and write it down. He went out, and Scrum.org sent a lot of people out to various organizations around the world that are known to be doing Scrum well at scale, places like Spotify, places like Salesforce. Microsoft now is doing very well in the Scrum world, although sometimes Windows still sucks, which I've got a problem. But that's an engineering issue rather than a Scrum issue. It was reverse engineered from that, so they're trying to, what is the minimum that we need to do? Is there any questions? Cool. If you've got any questions that you didn't want everybody else to hear because your practices are so ridiculously bad that you don't want anybody else to know you're doing them, feel free to come up afterwards. I have business cards if you want them. You can find me online. And I am happy to even just answer questions if you have questions, even if you just want to email me. Also happy to come and visit your organization too, if that is what you want. And by the way, I'm as blunt in person in an organization as I am here. So if you want me to come and beat up some people that don't know what they're doing, I'm perfectly good with that too. And thank you.